Hello, everyone. We are live. Happy Wednesday. My gosh, it's Wednesday, August 11th. And we are here with yet another episode of the Event Hustler Show. We have taken a little bit of a break for about, I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks, but it feels like it didn't happen at all. This summer has been flying by. So very excited to be back with you all. And today I get to chat with Dana Freker Doody from JUNO. And Dana has really made a huge contribution to the events industry throughout your career. And I thought it would just be a fun time to like catch up, talk about the things that you're working on, talk about your perspective on the industry. So first, I want to say hello. Thank you for joining today.
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I think that's an important question that we need to not just be asking, but really listening for the answers, right? I've seen some things on social media across our space about, how are you doing? Can we be a little more patient with each other? And one of the answers that I gave when someone posed that question over on Facebook was, I started wondering how much straw was on the camel's back before the last straw that broke the camel's back, right? So some days I'm like, am I getting close to the full load or am I not there yet?
You're like surprised. You're like, I can't believe there could be this big of a load.
Right. Sometimes, right? Like, I'm so resilient, which is great. But I also think during this time, I've gotten really good, Liz, about giving myself a lot of grace and forgiveness. So
difficult.
Yeah.
That's really hard.
Just like breathing. So if any of you out there are not okay,
it is okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I see Mary is here already joining us. She says, hello, ladies. Very excited to tune in. So glad you're here. I do see we have other live watchers. So if you guys have anything to share with with Dana, any questions for her, or you want to say hi to Mary, that's good too. So feel free to put them in the comment section of wherever you're watching. We'll try to work those in. But I'm so glad that our conversation started here with just like the real talk about how are you doing? Because I think the industry has just been through so much. And I think whenever people felt like maybe we're coming around, like this is getting to a good place, then all of a sudden, it's getting a little bit crazier again with Delta. I was just talking to Dahlia El-Ghazar this morning, and she was saying like everything's canceling all of a sudden. So, and not just with her, but in the industry. How are you dealing with it all?
I saw some non-industry friends, because it was last weekend, and they were asking about my business. I've switched companies since then, but they were remembering they had been with me the weekend early in March when events started canceling, because I had shown up at the tailgate with bottles of champagne and cupcakes just to try and like bury all of those scary feelings, right? And so I really see that rearing its head again. And people in our space, Liz, they want to be okay, and they want to be able to bring people together so badly that I can see where this whiplash would be even worse than the first time around. So one, I feel very fortunate to not be in the same position that I was in before in working through all these things. But I also see just the level of uncertainty. I don't know what the universe is trying to teach event professionals, but it is certainly that something related to uncertainty being the thing, right? Yeah. I mean, we're so like, we want to control everything, and that just, it just gotta be letting go of more and more things, which is so scary.
It is. And, I've been doing these kind of conversations for 10 plus years, and never before have they started with these kind of conversations where you're like, we're just learning to take a deep breath and care for myself. And in some ways, that's, I think, one of the good things our industry is learning. We have been known for top 5 most stressful jobs in the world. And we wrangle things that shouldn't have to be wrangled. And we think of things that you haven't thought about. And it's a very high stress environment. And it's all about control. It's about, we take all these things that are out of control and put them in control. And I can say for myself, I'm such a control freak in every aspect of my life, which is why event planning is a good career for me. But yeah, nothing like the last year and a half to shake that up, right?
It is. It's very jarring to look at. And when you start looking then even at the economic impact that it has on so many people that you know, and those concentric circles just keep getting wider, and the, you know, the devastation starts moving inward. It's a scary place to be. But we do know some things that are working. And like you said, if this is a time for people to really take stock and be taking care of themselves and keep looking for those silver linings, I mean, that's a balance that every person has to take. I'm not trying to be a Pollyanna about like, oh, don't worry about where the rent money is coming from,
Right.
because rent money is a real thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see Kiki is saying hello to both of us. She said this week has been a tough one, feeling very stressed again, which I know so many in the industry are. She said she gave a keynote in NC a few weeks back, and they were telling me it would be the last hybrid event they did because they only wanted to do in person. And I was hearing that across the industry.
Yeah.
We're going back to in person. And I think it was just a few podcast episodes ago that someone used the example of an elastic band. It's like, we've done only virtual, and then it's kind of snapping back and people only want to do in person. But really, when that finally loosens out, and I think Delta is showcasing the fact that there will have to be some middle ground here. We're not going to go back to only in person.
Right.
Of course, in person is not going away. But I think anyone who was very excited to jump back wholly into in person is suddenly starting to think that might not be so realistic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and that whole term that you just shared, go back, right? I hear that a lot, right? Like at JUNO, we hear clients like, oh no, we want to go back. Oh no, our board's mandating we have to go back. Oh no, we got to go back. I'm like, there's no going back.
Yes.
I think maybe that's what the second wave is teaching us, is that there's just no going back. Even if you go back to in person, it has to be different.
Absolutely. Everyone's expectations have changed so much, and there's just too much that's different now in all of society to just do things the way we were doing them.
Right. And you know, that word pivot became such a like dirty word, but it's a continual thing, you know, that life is handing us, that we just need to continue to pivot. And there maybe was a lot of opportunity to be reinventing and reimagining that wasn't going on, that now needs to go on. And, you know, when you ask how I am, when I'm in motion, I'm great. And I think that's really what I see for events in the rest of 2021 and into 2022. When they're in motion, when they're making some changes, when they're looking strategically, when they're laying everything on the table and really digging into the value that they're bringing, they're in motion, they're great. When they're holding and saying, oh no, we got to wait till we can go back in person again only because we don't want to do hybrid, that's when it gets a little bit scary.
Yeah, exactly. Why do we want to go back? Can we reinvent and find better ways to do what we were doing before is such a good point.
And just because one thing didn't work, Liz, doesn't mean another thing won't work. Right. So absolutely. Like when I hear about the connection that Kiki brought up where she was presenting, is that group is so like, we are never doing this again. Like, well, don't do that. Even when you're in virtual, don't go back. Don't go back and do the same virtual, right? Keep iterating on that.
Yeah. There's so much room for growth at this point. And I think that that's a huge opportunity, but it's very scary for people. It's just very different. And, you know, I think I talked to a planner a few weeks ago who's back to doing all in person. All of her clients want to do in person. They don't want to do any virtual. And yet all of our clients, we don't have a single client who wants to do in person. They only want to do virtual. Wow. And that just really shows you, I think, the way that people are thinking and who you're hanging out with and the skill set of the person that you're working with and what they lead you to want to do. There's just so many factors, but there's so much that can be done on both ends of the extreme to be more meaningful and to create better events. And that's really the space we have to push ourselves towards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned that a year and a half ago when COVID started, you were in a different place. And I did say this would be kind of a career catch up. So do you want to catch us up just on what's been going on in your career over the last year and a half and some of the exciting stuff that you're working on now?
Yeah, you know what? I hit 6 months at JUNO today. Actually, I was looking at my calendar. I started February 10th or 11th. So 6 months in this event technology world. JUNO is, we connect and educate people in a virtual environment, and we can do that year round, not just at events. which I know we want to get into too, Liz. So career-wise for me, I've always been a big believer in how technology can support and advance events, right? I think that's how you and I met, Liz. It's
exactly.
way back when. And I was producing hybrid events for some of the clients at my former company. And so I always believed in that. And the technology has to be viewed as an advantage. I mean, we view it as an advantage in so many other areas of our life. And it is used for good, even in places where it can be used for evil. It's also being used for good, right? So it was a good fit for me to jump in with an entrepreneur whose message I believe in. And that community software base that JUNO had, Liz, is really a draw for me because I have spent many years, even before I was at the Expo Group. This is like a random story, but I worked as a copy editor for community newspapers. Okay. So if the basketball scores for the YMCA League did not get into the Louisville Leader, or the, Mother's Day tea and Mother's Day out schedule didn't get in, like the community was upset. Like they relied on that newspaper as a source for what was going on in the community. And it really struck me even then of how the newspaper, one, as a media company, was a big part of the community. And two, how sharing those types of things had such an impact on so many people's lives in that physical community.
Yeah.
So that whole thing carried through in my career in events. I mean, what is an event if not bringing a community together and helping those people to gather? And so now I'm really able to help people do that on a virtual platform, which is really another venue. Somebody just put out, Liz, it was like the top destinations. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but pretty soon like your venues are going to be, all of these virtual event companies. Your destination could be simply online. So.
And that is the case for so many people, but they don't necessarily see it that way. They see virtual as kind of like a Band-Aid to get us through until they can, as we said earlier, go back to whatever they were doing before.
Right.
But I think it's more and more that people will start to see them as the home of everything that's happening at your event, which is the venue, and we have had some clients talking about the virtual platform as the venue and what do you want, just the kind of the same questions you would ask about your in-person venue. What do you want that to deliver for your attendees, and not just using a platform because it's the same platform that your friends used or someone else, a competitor used.
Right. Do you take your show to, Grand Rapids just because, some other association took their show to Grand Rapids? Shout out to Grand Rapids, because apparently they're stuck. That's branding works, people. I was on an event this morning that Grand Rapids had sponsored.
There you go.
But yeah, absolutely, Liz, because you would never, if you really take this analogy like really far, you would never put your event in a hotel or a convention center where there were just walls straight up and people walked out of their hotel room and they couldn't see anything until all of a sudden they blasted into this room.
Yes.
Right. Or even they had walls all the way and they didn't even blast into the room. They just knew they could kind of hear that there were other people there, but they couldn't talk to them. Yes. Right. That's not, you would never put your event or trade show in that facility. Yeah. So when you think about these virtual venues, the opportunity for people to connect and talk to each other and move across the space is vast with some of the technologies. And those are the questions that people need to be asking.
And yet, when you look at venues, you're looking for, the look and feel and the technical functionality and all these things. And you're looking for the differentiating factors between each of them. When you look at virtual platforms, at least what I'm seeing a lot of planners doing, first of all, they're not necessarily looking for those differences. They're again going with whatever they've heard is really good because it's easy to find. And I find that on the company side, the companies aren't really that good at differentiating themselves. If you look at those charts that are like, here's all the virtual platforms and all the functionality, and it's just lots of X's. It's like, yep, we do it all.
Right.
What are the differences? JUNO has really to me stood out as you guys have really talked about community and this idea of year-round community a lot more than what I'm seeing other venues, virtual venues do. And even in the idea that, a lot of other companies are doing the year-round thing. And I am seeing some of these virtual platforms shifting to annual licenses and things like that. But the way that you guys are talking about the importance of community, building community and giving content year-round, I think is just really different and very smart. And I'm sure you have played a role in all of that, because I think that's really important for planners to understand. If this is what I'm trying to do, this is a good platform that could fit those needs.
Yeah. And thank you. It is, I'm probably guilty as charged in checking all those boxes because we do everything, but also people define all those things different, right? So you have to say you can do something because someone, right? Someone may think along those lines, someone may think along these lines. But when it comes to community, one, like I shared before, JUNO came out of a company called CrowdHub that was creating community software long before the pandemic. I mean, they were in business for 10 years. And I think that you talked to Josh about community too. I mean, he's an expert in human connection.
Yeah.
And yes, with my understanding of how people come together and the way we were trying to create small niche communities within the trade shows and events for clientele when I was working for a general services contractor, that is not only one of my favorite words, but one of my favorite things. It's very important to me. And even for physical communities or for a community like this, for people to feel connected, not just your network, but to actually have a community where you can go into a Facebook group and say, I'm not doing so hot right now, right? Or you can come into an Event Hustlers podcast like this and be like, whoa, like, okay, those people in my community are saying kind of the same things and feeling the same things that I am, and for you to feel that connection. It's interesting, and I'm really excited to kind of delve into what the future holds in our virtual venues. Thank you, Mary, for communities moving forward, because community is such an odd thing, because associations and event planners have to, going back to the beginning of our conversation, give up a little control.
Yeah.
Right. But really you have to recognize that their value is not in what they provide as an entity. The value is in their ability to create connections for their members.
And that's a really hard shift for people, because you've gone from we charge what we charge for our events because we give you X, Y, and Z, and it's the keynote speakers, and it's the content, and it's the number of sessions and the number of speakers and all these things that you're basically pushing out and hoping attracts people. And what I think has happened for a long, long time is that what's actually attracting people is not all that stuff you're pushing out, but the other people who are there. I mean, that's why just even in the last few years, you see like on Eventbrite or something, it'll say, Dana's also going to this event. And I'm 10 times likely to be like, well, then I'll go, who cares who the speakers are? It's like IMEX America. I've gone, I mean, obviously not in the past few years, but I go every year. I don't necessarily do much.
But everybody else is there, Liz. We have to be there.
I know. That's exactly right. But that's uncomfortable for people to take themselves out of the driver's seat and out of the focus. It's not really about coming to engage with my organization because we're so amazing.
Right.
People don't really care about that.
Yeah. And the year-round thing kind of freaks people out too, and it's because of that, because they feel the onus is on them to be producing and creating the content. That's when we talk to groups and they're like, oh, I can't do that. I'm like, no, you can, because you don't actually have to do it.
Right. Exactly.
Right? You are enabling others to make those connections year round. You're enabling others to produce some content. I will share, this is like breaking news, Liz, that we are spinning up a community just on JUNO, right? Because I started looking at, we have a site that exists so we can give sales demos. We had a site that existed where we were doing webinars like really early on in the company. And I was like, no, like people, just let people in, right? Just let people in and they can interact with each other and we'll see what happens. So it could be like the world's like worst disaster Or it could be like a really valuable place where people can just come and see what's shaking. And, you know, we are putting content in there, Juno is, but we're also inviting people in there to connect with each other. And the way this software is able to create cohorts and learning groups, you know, we're going to start diving into that and helping people to understand how those things actually work throughout the year.
Yeah, it's so smart because I think people have to experience it. It's like you said, very overwhelming to think about, oh my gosh, it's not a once a year event. It's every single day
Yeah.
for 365
Right.
days. And what does that look like? And how does it feel? Is it fun? How does it become fun? How do you know, I see a lot of people focusing on like, well, how do we make it fun? Some place that
Right.
people want to hang out. You know, all these
Yeah.
virtual communities are not Facebook. They're not a place that people have as the first app on their screen that they're clicking on 900,000 times a
Yeah.
day. You
Yeah.
have to attract people to these communities. I mean, there is some work involved in that.
Yes.
And it's not until you're in really good ones that you start to see this is what brings me back. And this is the value that it provides. You kind of have to experience it from the user perspective, I think.
Yeah. And it's, I think you're right. The ones where you see it happening really good is it's better than the LinkedIn because it's targeted. It's better than Facebook because it's like so professional in there, right? So, and you know, there are a lot of organizations who are concerned about everything that's going on with some of those social media companies. So being able to have, it's still a private community, right?
Right.
You know, you can still have the requirements and the rules. You know, one of the rules and the one that I'm launching is there's no lifeguard on duty, right? Like you call 911 if there's a problem, basically. But it really helps for organizations, Liz, to level out the peaks and valleys, right? So associations in particular, and you know, even media companies, like there's this big peak with the annual event, and then it's just a valley in terms of content, in terms of member engagement, in terms of finances, right? I mean, with annual subscriptions and annualized content creation, you're leveling out all of those valleys, right? The workload, the resources, and the monetization of it. So we really see the virtual communities as a way to level out those peaks and valleys.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And obviously community is one way to do that. One of the questions that I had for you was just around, I know you have a ton of trade show experience and work with a ton of associations. And one of my questions for you is, what do you think associations and trade shows need to be doing to be successful as we move forward? Like whether it goes back to in person, it's hybrid, whatever it looks like. In addition to building community, what are some of the other things that they need to start thinking about so that they can pivot?
Right.
Because it's a crazy world for them right now.
It
A
is.
lot of their, revenue is based on this one huge event and bringing people together physically in this physical location. And that is threatened not just for 2020 and 2021, but potentially future years as well. Just wondering whether people are going to be comfortable going to, 50,000 person events and roaming a trade show floor with who knows.
Right. And we don't know. Right. That's the
thing.
Yeah. And if we go with community as one of the things that I think those large trade show entities need to be looking at, the other two C's I would add, Liz, are clarity and collaboration. So the more clarity that organizers can bring to what the purpose of their actual event and trade show is, right? If you're like, just get really clear within your own organization, if this trade show was invented so that you could pay for all of these education programs, or if you could pay for other program that goes on or whatever, like be very clear with that internally, and then get very clear about whether that is part of your future strategic plan. Right. And then we start getting into some design thinking of, okay, what's the strategy here? What is the purpose of this thing? Okay, let's design something that meets that, and it can even exceed expectations, but certainly meets the objectives of the parties and the stakeholders involved. And that's where collaboration comes in, right? Like you have to know your customers.
Absolutely.
I think that you have to know all the stakeholders, the attendees, the exhibitors, the industry press, anyone who's sponsored, your internal groups, people who hold power within your space and within your organization. And the more you can collaborate and talk to them about what they are looking for, trade shows were afraid when the internet was invented. Right.
Yeah.
And the internet was invented, a couple dozen years ago. So I think that the digital marketing aspect is enhanced with face-to-face interaction. But like you said, if the trade show is not clear about what it is and not clear about whether that is in fact a business model that's going to work, we had two in the last month. I got to brag on the team because we had 2 hosted buyer events on the JUNO platform. Mm-hmm. And that involved some customization of the platform, but to be able to offer appointments instead of just a booth.
Right.
That's where I'm talking about the collaboration that has to occur between brands and the organizers is what are you actually looking for?
Yeah.
If I can offer you these appointments in this online venue, but then also this thing that's occurring in another type of venue, a physical venue, let's talk about how we package those up together and create something that is beneficial for everybody.
And that's, the creativity that you were talking about earlier, that we all need to think outside the box. We need to be more creative to come up with solutions to achieve the same goals or to meet even exceed those goals. And that's an interesting, like just going back to the very beginning of our conversation where we were talking about like taking some time to breathe. And a friend of mine, Dana Freker, who is an executive assistant, she's been posting about one of her clients who just wrote a new book, which I'm going to forget the name of now, but it was about just taking a moment to think. And I think this time in the events industry is just a lot of people are being forced to just take time because they have no other choice. And there's this level of overwhelm that's leading people to feel like I need to prioritize my health and I need to think about mental health and I need to all these things. And it's good timing because there's never been a time where our industry needs to be as creative as it does right now.
Right.
Rethink what we've been doing so that we can be successful as the whole world changes. To your point about knowing the audience has changed completely. If you knew them very well, sorry, but you have to start all over again now, which is kind of crazy.
And you have to go at it, like, especially from a marketing perspective, people are asking me like, well, what works or what's going to work? Be like, 1, I have no idea. 2, I'm ready to find out. 3, if we look at this data or if we try this thing, I think we can figure it out. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not totally, like we have no clue what people want. We have some good indicators. We know our audience from the past, and we can use that as kind of like gut checks to identify what might work. But, to your point about trade shows, like we just don't know what people are going to feel comfortable with. And everyone's going to feel a different level of comfort doing, whatever activity it is, personal or business.
Right.
So that's a complicating factor, but it's very interesting.
And you read all these articles about, I don't think that, I think that the future is much more technologically based than a lot of people. And I have thought that way for a long time. But the future of work does not necessarily mean in an office. It could be in an office, could be an office for some people and other people. And you read a lot of these articles about, employees will get the short shrift if they're not in the office. Be like, but if the managers are not in the office, it doesn't matter, right? Like wherever leadership is and what their mindset is, that's what the indicator is. And where we are as a society and with the generational shifts that are going on, that whole idea is being questioned. I have a 17-year-old son. He's questioning everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And even generations in between he and I are questioning those kinds of things. So it's not just like what people are going to want to do, but what the people in power are saying is necessary or not necessary. There are a lot of industries where I think there's going to be people who are like, nope, we got to meet with the people in person. We got to kick the tires on that thing. And that's why this trade show will always work, which is awesome. And that needs to happen. And so those people who run those kind of shows need to know that. They probably already know that. But there is also that question of, well, what if they could advance some of these objectives in a different kind of venue?
Yeah.
And then they're kicking the tire, right? So maybe that flow of a buyer through a buyer journey for you, the brands that you support as an organizer have changed.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the questions that needs to be on the table.
I completely agree. Kiki L'Italian says, even if most interaction happens online, folks are still going to want to get together in person, but we can't be together in person all the time anyway. So why don't we figure out, other ways to connect with each other all in between? Dahlia's here. She says, hi. I was just talking about you, Dahlia, in the beginning.
I have not talked to a single person, and granted, most of my associates are women of a similar age. I've not talked to a single one who misses being gone from their home, from their bed, from their family, from their dinner table, from their activities, from their parents, from their pets. I haven't talked to a single one who misses being gone as much as they were gone.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. Like, as much as I love to travel, and I love it, and I love to be on site with people, I could stand to do it a lot less and supplement that with virtual. And that's a big question for these people who are obsessed with going back to in-person only. Is your in-person event so good that instead of 100 events a year, I'm going to choose 10, that I'm going to choose your event to go to in person? That's a lot of pressure, just that alone.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, if you're going to ask, if I had to look at my crystal ball, is like the bad events are going away and the good events are getting better. Right. But you could say that about any kind of trend that has happened in our society. But I don't think the future of work is necessarily in office. I don't think the future of education is necessarily in a school. And I certainly don't think the future of events is necessarily in a convention center or a hotel. It could be but that's one of the venues. And
not that it will never be. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I could just talk to you forever. I just looked at the clock.
That would be fun, except that then no one would get fed.
Oh, that's right. We have to make well, thank you so much for joining me today and chatting. I think we covered a wide range of topics, but I think, as you said, you and I have been on the same page about, technology and all these things for a very long time. And I was joking with my brother-in-law today, and I was saying, like, it's nice that the whole world seems to be talking about like what we want to talk about now. Like we've been saying.
And much more than they were last April, right?
Yeah.
They're much more of where.
Even a year ago now, after 6 months of the pandemic, I think people were very much thinking, we're going back to in person. Let's do this. Like, this is just now. I think the Delta variant is really making people question that. Like, anyone who was a holdout as like virtual just a Band-Aid, I think this is really shaking that group of people up.
Yeah.
So now everyone is thinking, like, what do we do? And again, in person is not going anywhere, but how do we supplement that and change things and be more creative to meet the needs of our constituents? I think is super important.
Yeah. You have to have a yes and mentality.
Absolutely.
Not either or.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all who are watching live and commenting. Love the stream of all the things that you're saying, and I'm trying to read them as we were chatting.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, it was awesome to see the comments, and thank you, Kiki.
And such good people here. So we'll post this in all the places on social media and stuff so that people can see it and on our podcast. Dana, take care. Take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon. Yes. Absolutely.
Bye, Liz.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Event Hustler Show. Have a great day.